Are you ready for a Lane Myers overdose? Lane Myers gets ejected from his hearing on his motion for a second bond hearing. Screams at the judge not to cut him off. Gets put on timeout before shocked audience in court. Cerio gets desperate in his attempts at human interaction. Will anyone, human or otherwise, respond to his growing bellows of need as he seeks human emotions? Lane Myers returns to live streaming in an interview with John Filax, proclaims himself a genius and that his motions are legally correct, says that he has laid a trap for everyone and they stupidly fell into it in court. While sitting in jail for the next 3 weeks before his motion to replace the judge in the case, is he really winning? He says yes. I'm your humble newsreader, Pants. You're a kumquat shining in the sun and reflecting sunlight a bit better than Lane Myers' bald spot. And we're about to experience auditing insanity. Friday's hearing to determine if jailed YouTuber Lane Myers would receive a second bond hearing for multiple felony and misdemeanor charges had an explosive end as Myers was removed from the courtroom after an altercation with the judge. Our courtroom reporter observed that Myers appeared anxious and was fidgeting with his materials before his hearing started on Friday. He briefly talked to prosecuting attorney Rachel Stiles over terms of his possible bond, arguing that a felony conviction in Illinois when he was in his 20s should not count against him in his quest for bond. Myers had a status conference on Monday where he presented his motion for a new bond hearing to Judge D. Douglas Metcalf. Myers claimed in the motion that a rule of procedure allowed him to a mandatory bond hearing, as his cases had passed from one court to another. Prosecutor Stiles countered that Myers already had a bond hearing and had a second no bond hearing where his attorney was allowed to cross-examine witnesses and put on evidence. Furthermore, she has argued that under Arizona rules of procedure, and as stated in Arizona's Constitution, someone accused of committing new felony charges while out on bond for previous felony charges is not eligible for bond. Judge Metcalf denied Myers' demand for an immediate hearing on bond and set the Friday hearing to discuss the motion. At the end of Monday's hearing, Myers screamed that he would not show up to the Friday hearing, then later promised that he would cause a disruption at that hearing. That threat was on everyone's mind as Myers attempted to file a motion to change the judge using Rule 10.1 of Arizona's Rules of Criminal Procedure after Judge Metcalf began the hearing. As the judge went to look up Rule 10.1, Myers began to become verbally agitated and pressured Metcalf to take immediate action. Metcalf asked Myers to calm down while he reviewed the rule. Metcalf read the rule and accepted that Myers had filed the motion in open court and ruled that it could not take effect for this hearing as Myers needed to file it before the hearing started. Myers argued that he had actually filed the motion before the hearing had started, which was disputed by Metcalf. The two began to bicker, and Myers indicated that he did not file the motion via postal mail, as was his ability as a pro se defendant who is incarcerated, because the motion would not have arrived in time for Friday's hearing. Metcalf reminded Myers that it was his decision to go pro se, and that he must abide by the rules that all pro se defendants who are incarcerated agree to. Myers began to talk over Metcalf, accusing him of running a kangaroo court and making up his own rules of procedure. He then demanded to be taken back to the jail cell, as the proceedings were now over. Metcalf responded by angrily ejecting Myers from the courtroom, which Myers started to ignore before being escorted out of the courtroom by security. Following Myers' ejection, Metcalf denied Myers' motion for a second bond hearing without prejudice and stated that Myers could refile it once the hearing was held for Myers' 10.1 motion. Mark Resnick, Myers' advisory counsel, expressed concern that he could not represent Myers in the case until a formal hearing was conducted to remove Myers' pro se status. Judge Metcalf said that he was taking Resnick's concerns under advisement and that he was only denying the motion and taking no further action at the hearing. Prosecutor Rachel Stiles interjected that there was no record of Myers' motion for the new bond hearing within the court's electronic filing system. Metcalf ordered court workers to find the motion and put it on file within the system before ending the hearing. Myers' filing was available to download within the Arizona Superior Court's online records database later that evening. A hearing with presiding Judge Danielle Lewinsky has been scheduled for June 6, 2025, to review Myers' motion to remove Judge Metcalf from the case. Charming representative of the Seattle area, Glenn Cerio, released a new video on Friday featuring his observations of humanity while making a failed attempt to interact with humanity in Everett, Washington. The video started with Cerio alone and ignored. He would eventually make his way across a busy intersection to stand on a street to observe a traffic accident. Two SUVs had collided with a car, blocking a busy intersection in Everett. Cerio was briefly approached by a man who appeared to be the father of one of the participants in the crash, who asked him why he was filming. Cerio replied with his standard "why not" line and explained that he had the right to film anything in public. The man wandered off, and that was essentially the end of human contact with Cerio for the rest of the 1-hour video, released to Cerio's channel. Ignored by firefighters, bystanders, victims of the crash, and tow truck drivers, Cerio's attempts at provoking using racially offensive language were largely ignored by those at the scene. Most were too busy with their duties at the scene to notice the increasingly desperate YouTuber. Even when Cerio began to get visibly uncomfortable with the amount of female police officers on the scene and began to degrade them under his breath, no one stopped to interact with him. He got a "yeah" from a passing tow truck driver, whom he tried to share a laugh with over the fact that police never clean up the streets involved in traffic stops. The man then wandered away from Cerio, joining two other tow truck drivers as they worked to remove the three vehicles. He then spent time attempting to insult a group of victims who needed to use translation software on their phones to interact with police. Cerio would later become outraged when he heard one of the women in the group thank the officers on scene for their help. Cerio's video may have been intended to be used as an indictment of emergency services in Everett. However, it came off as anything but. Police officers were dedicated to interviewing the three groups of victims while directing traffic in the busy intersection. The tow truck drivers worked diligently to clean up the chemicals deposited on the road by the crash after securing the cars. All in all, overly efficient in clearing the major wreck in under an hour's time. Alas, their effectiveness in their duties robbed Cerio of the human connections he was apparently craving. He ultimately ended the live stream without a major confrontation with any of the victims or emergency workers. This was the second true dud of a video since Cerio returned to cop watching last year after a self-imposed exile while his criminal court cases played out. While Cerio has begun to race bait again to improve his chances at human interaction, he was unsuccessful in Friday's video. It was a sad cry from the fire and fury the YouTuber had displayed before being bogged down by nearly endless criminal cases. Even though he beat all his charges, Cerio's new approach is more timid and less entertaining than his old approach to human interaction during his videos. With human companionship again denied, Cerio ended the live stream and waddled back into the streets of Everett, his needs unfulfilled. Cerio's video has had 343 views in 20 hours since its release. We will continue to document his attempts at human interaction in future news stories. Jailed YouTuber Lane Myers appeared for an interview on John Filax's YouTube channel Friday night, hours after being removed from a hearing to determine if he would be awarded a second hearing for bond. In the 1-hour interview, Filax established Myers' background leading up to his eventual jailing in the case. Myers described his upbringing as a gifted child whose mother let him attend college classes at age 6. He said that he had no knowledge of the law, but was able to win 17 cases in a row in Pima County as he follows the Pima County Rules of Procedure and has a natural ability to memorize and recite the law. When discussing the current case, Myers revealed that he learned through discovery that Tucson prosecutor Matt Walker had contacted the University of Arizona prior to Myers' wife's firing from her job at the university last year and implied a conspiracy between Walker and the university. Walker's wife, an employee of the university, is listed as the victim of the charges against Myers. Myers justified his actions, which saw him charged with multiple felonies while being out on bond for previous felonies, as legal, as he was simply correcting misinformation. He also shared that he believed that all charges would be dropped against him before his July trial. Though if the charges made it to trial, he would be going for jury nullification and targeting a single juror to vote against conviction and force a mistrial. Myers eventually bragged that he was playing mind games with the prosecutor and judge in his current case. He further stated that he had put Judge D. Douglas Metcalf in a trap, as Judge Metcalf violated rules of procedure when it came to removing Myers from the courtroom earlier in the day. Judge Metcalf had Myers removed from the courtroom after a verbal altercation between the men. Myers had insisted that he had filed a motion to remove the judge before the hearing had started, and Judge Metcalf corrected him by stating that he had filed the motion in open court. Myers continued to talk over Metcalf and became abusive, prompting his removal from the courtroom. According to Myers, Metcalf should have issued a verbal warning and had Myers removed from the courtroom for 5 minutes before coming back to check on him to see if he was calm enough to move forward. Instead, Metcalf removed Myers from the courtroom, dismissed his motion without prejudice, and adjourned the hearing. Myers stated that his actions were part of a bigger plan to have Metcalf removed from the case. He admitted that he had intended to disrupt the Friday hearing to provoke Metcalf into charging him with contempt as part of his plan to have Metcalf removed. Because of his actions, Myers must now wait another 3 weeks for his motion to have Metcalf removed, as the hearing for his motion has been scheduled for early June. Following the hearing, Myers claimed that a jail security officer named Perez verbally assaulted him and punched him in the chest while in the court's holding cell when he was awaiting transport back to the jail. The YouTuber claimed Perez was accompanied by guards Soto and Ramirez, and that he would be putting in a FOIA request for the body cam videos from all 3 officers. It is unclear if participation in Filax's YouTube channel would be considered an interview with the press, and if such interviews needed to be approved by jail staff in advance. Myers had previously agreed to stop appearing on live streams as a compromise to possible punishment by the jail in April. The Pima County Adult Correctional Facility was in the process of establishing rules for live streams at the time, and Myers voluntarily stopped live streaming. The hearing with presiding judge Danielle Lewinsky to determine if Judge D. Douglas Metcalf will be removed from Myers' case has been scheduled for June 6, 2025. We need your help. Both ReallyCoolSite.org's daily newspaper and our daily newscasts are funded by your continuing donations and what we make from our YouTube AdSense revenue each month. If you'd like to contribute to help us keep the lights on, eating, feeding the cats, defending ourselves from lawsuit threats, and writing news stories to feature on both the newspaper and newscast each day, you can do so via a donation to our PayPal, Cash App, or GoFundMe accounts. If you can't afford to contribute, please watch our videos from beginning to end, like, share, subscribe, and comment. You can help by doing next to nothing, and we thank you in advance for pitching in.